Hi guys, so just a disclaimer that this podcast episode has very explicit content in it that could be very sensitive to some individuals. So if this is too much for you to handle, don't worry, just pause the podcast here now. If not, enjoy the episode. Hi guys, so this is our new podcast, Sustainability Uncovered. I'm your host, Neve, the part-time Environmental and Sustainability Officer at UPSU. I'm here with my co-host today, Kelsey. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Kelsey. I'm the Deputy Part-time and Sustainability Officer with Neve, and I'm happy to be here.
Lovely. So today's issue, we're looking at modern day slavery. We have a wonderful guest, Clare from Unseen. Unseen was a charity founded back in 2008. It's a part of an anti-modern day slavery charity based in Bristol, working towards a world without slavery. Clare's here today to discuss the issues surrounding modern day slavery and the work that Unseen does. Hi Clare.
Hi, UK.
So what would you define as slavery?
So modern day slavery is essentially the exploitation of other people for personal or commercial gain. And modern slavery is everywhere. It's all around us, but often just out of sight. So people can become entrapped making our clothes, serving our food, picking crops, working in factories, or even working in houses as cooks, cleaners, or nannies. And slavery itself, and I'll go into a bit more detail about those individual things later, but slavery is an umbrella term, and that is for activities involved when one person obtains or holds another person in compelled service. So the legal definition, and someone is in slavery if they are forced to work through mental or physical threat, owned or controlled by an employer, quote unquote, usually through mental or physical abuse or threat of abuse, dehumanized, treated as a commodity, or bought or sold as property, or physically constrained, or have restrictions placed on their freedom. And, you know, that's a very kind of, I'll talk through some stories as well and a bit later, and some more facts and figures, but that is the legal definitions.
Thank you, Claire. So what were the different forms of modern day slavery?
We have lots of different types of modern slavery. And I suppose the main ones that we have are human trafficking. So human trafficking is the use of violence, threats or coercion to transport, recruit or harbour people in order to exploit them for purposes such as forced prostitution, labour, criminality, marriage, or even organ removal. You know, a lot of people think of human trafficking as someone being trafficked border to border. And yes, that is true. But Neve, if I picked you up now and forcibly moved you next door, that is human trafficking. It doesn't matter how far you travel, as if it's by what I said, you know, the use of violence, threat or coercion to transport someone. Another really bad one in the UK especially is forced labour. So currently worldwide, there's about 45 million people entrapped in some form of slavery. And what we found is forced labour is one of the worst ones. So forced labour, we estimate about 25 million people. And that is people who are in any work or services where they're forced to, so against their will or under threat or punishment. We see a lot of forced labour in building sites, car washes, nail bars, and that type of thing. And I can guarantee for anyone listening, if you think of a car wash or a nail bar that you've seen, which is cash only, you know, the men in the car wash don't wear PPE equipment. They don't speak very well English. All these things are signs to look out for. And I'll talk a bit later about the signs and what you need to look out for. But it's such a massive problem, especially here in the UK. And that 45 million people I told you about, that's probably a third of what it actually is. That's the people we know about. It is such a hidden crime. It happens everywhere. And in the UK, this figure only came out in the last couple of months. So in 2019, we actually estimated there was about 10,000, but we've recently found out it's actually 100,000 people in the UK, everywhere. And, you know, there are so many different types of modern slavery. As I said, human trafficking and forced labour. But there's another type of one which is called debt bondage. And debt bondage isn't just, rarely in a case of modern slavery do you have one form of modern slavery. For example, you could have been trafficked over and now you're in forced labour in a construction site and now you're stuck in a debt bondage. So a debt bondage is basically when people are trapped in poverty, they borrow money and are forced to work or pay off the debt. So, in that sense, they're losing control over both their employment conditions and the debt, and they get into this horrible cycle. So, yeah, it's happening everywhere. And I think we have these figures and these stats, but it's more than that. It's, about 1 in 200 people worldwide.
1 in 200 people, that's just absolutely insane. I just can't believe the extent to this and how it's such an important issue.
And the scale of which modern day slavery is such a problem at the moment, how does it differ compared to the transatlantic slave trade?
So the transatlantic slave trade, to start, was a legal business. And that's obviously a main difference. And the transatlantic slave operated between Europe, Africa, and America. So ships were sailed from Europe to Africa. They would take goods like pots, pans, guns, and alcohol to be traded. And the traders captured millions of African men, women, and children, and essentially just shipped them across the Atlantic Ocean to be enslaved. And, I'll talk a bit more about, the conditions and what happened, but actually we need to remember the conditions on the ships. They were brutal, they were degrading, so many people lost their lives. People took, the trip itself took 6 to 8 weeks and longer. And once the people arrived in America or in Europe, they were traded for products like sugar, coffee, tobacco, and cotton. It was abolished in Britain from 1807 onwards, although obviously illegal trade continued for a further, 60 odd years, and obviously, now modern slavery. But the main difference being it was legal back then. And I think the other difference that, the massive difference we see now is actually that the crossing of borders seen in so many human trafficking cases also highlight a really key difference, particularly when we consider the developments in technology. So, nowadays we have better access. People can travel quicker and more safely than they used to. And now traffickers often recruit people through fraudulent job promises, and they can deceive people to travel willingly. We're talking about those differences, and the main difference being the technology and the false promises that are used now compared to what it used to be like. So we had a gentleman called Frank. Frank isn't his real name. Frank was in our services a while back, and Frank lived in Barbados with his wife and his 2 children. So Frank lost his job one day, which could obviously happen to anyone, especially during this pandemic. We're all vulnerable to these type of things, especially at the moment. So Frank did what anyone else would do. He looked for work. He downsized his house. He tried to just do anything that could possibly help him and his family. So Frank actually knew a gentleman in the UK. Frank had seen and met this guy for the last 10 years. He knew him quite well. And Frank knew that he was a businessman and a successful one as that. So Frank called him and asked him for some advice. And again, this will explain a massive difference. He was able to call him and use his vulnerability and say, look, Frank, I need help. So Frank then said to him, you can come, the guy said to Frank, you can come over to the UK, I can get you a job, and you can bring your son. So, months after Frank struggling and trying to find work, supporting his family, he's finally offered this lifeline. So the guy bought Frank a plane ticket for him and his son. Frank had never been on a plane before, and he thought that was very normal, a one-way ticket, whereas we all know that you get a return unless you have long-term plans to stay somewhere. So Frank got on the plane, he was brought over to the UK, he was thrown in the back of a van, and his passport taken away from him, and his son was taken away from him. Back in the day, that couldn't happen because you didn't have phones, you didn't have planes, this wasn't possible. And, in the past, people didn't have a choice if they were trafficked or forced enslaved, people would go to Africa and physically capture people. And now the main difference is this is all done using technology. And it is that easy to gain someone's trust and bring them over to the UK with means that are already available and can totally, not illegal to get a plane. I'll tell you the rest of Frank's story a bit later because I think it works out quite well. And the rest, I think the main difference is technology, simple as that. I think, there's so much easy access. You have county lines And county lines is obviously essentially means phone lines. And it's been highlighted in some shows, for example, Top Boy. If anyone's watched Top Boy, definitely give it a watch. And it's essentially drug traffickers using phones and, you know, technology and Snapchat and things like that to reach out to younger children. Like some of them are aged 10, sometimes younger. And they're texting them saying, can you take these drugs from Manchester city centre out to, I'm not very good on Manchester, but somewhere in the suburbs. Or, for example, Bristol, centre of Bristol, out to Taunton and the more rural areas. And it's all done by using a mobile phone. You can threaten people over a mobile phone. You can send pictures of someone's house, you know, a picture of their mum if they say no. And it's so accessible. And children these days especially are so tech savvy. You know, when I was 10, I had a Nokia 32. I couldn't do it. That is a massive problem. And I think there's such a responsibility also on us, but also on the companies who are producing Facebook, Snapchat, and things need to be regulated better. And I think it's going to happen regardless. And I think, you know, obviously our plan is to stop it and work myself out of a job because it shouldn't be happening in 2021. But we need the support of major technology companies and larger companies.
So you spoke a bit about how obviously during the transatlantic slave trade, people were physically captured and taken and put on the boats. But with Frank, it was just a bit different. So he lost his job, reached out to this person that he knew. So do you know of any other ways that people get into these situations?
People basically end up trapped in modern slavery because they're vulnerable. And it could be people being vulnerable to be tricked, trapped, exploited. And it's often a result of like poverty or exclusion. But there are a couple of cases where actually someone's vulnerability could be love. So, for example, there was a story about a young girl. She was a student and at a university in the UK, and she met what she thought was a lovely man who was also studying at university. For their year's anniversary, he took her to France for the weekend to meet his family, and he trafficked her into the sex industry. And that was his plan from day one. So, you know, you can talk about poverty. In Frank's case, you know, he was extremely vulnerable. He'd lost everything and he was just trying to support the people that he loved. And he was just tricked. But then you see this other girl and her vulnerability was as simple as love. And I think when you think of people who are in some form of modern slavery, you always assume that, you know, they've had a bad start in life. You know, their parents, you know, we have a lot of cases where parents sell their children. You know, underage marriage is a massive problem. And you always have people who say it would never happen to me. Yet we all have the ability to love. You know, and if it can happen to someone like that, it could happen to anybody. There are so many ways, you know, lies, you're promised a new life. You know, Frank never got on a plane before. He thought it was normal. It's essentially people exploiting people's vulnerabilities in so many different ways. And it's scary.
It puts in perspective, like it literally can happen to anyone. Yeah. Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your situation. These things can happen to you, and that's why it's such a wide issue. Why is it such a huge problem? Why has it? I know you partly talked about how technology and has advanced the capability of people, but why has this become such an, like, to quote the pun, but like unseen problem? Like, is it such a big issue?
So simply, like, slavery is fueled by the demand for extremely cheap labour. So the reason that modern slavery thrives is we think about kind of three factors, and there's demand for cheap labour, individual vulnerability, and greed. It's easy to exploit people. Like, you know, if you think about all these companies who, I mean, I don't necessarily want to name names, but like you have a lot of chocolate companies who don't pay their cocoa farmers the way they should. The makeup industry, okay? I know for the last 9 months, none of us have worn makeup, but usually it's such a big deal. And actually, there's a mineral in mascara, eyeliner, lipstick, and some foundations called mica. and it's mined in India by children as young as like 8. But there's such a demand. Like, we are the problem. Like, we are the problem. People want to exploit people because they can make big money, not pay taxes, and create a product which the public will buy. We have all bought mascara. We have all bought like eyeliner, lipstick. You know, food industry, we all go to the shop. We're attracted by cheap prices. And when you go to, like, you know, people say shop locally, and it's easier said than done. Like, I'm not saying like if you shop in a large supermarket or for a large company, like you're a bad person, because it's expensive otherwise. You know, shopping at your local deli or your local like fair trade shop, or, you know, your plastic free shop, it's expensive. Not everybody can afford that. And so, you know, the people that can shop locally and do their bit, fantastic. And the people that can't, it's not their responsibility, it's the company's responsibility. They are essentially just using people all across the world. For example, right, just to change subject quickly, you take your mobile phone, okay? Your mobile phone, I'm not a pro on mobile phones. Your mobile phone is made up of the battery, the case, the electronics, the buttons. Let's say you have Samsung at the top here, okay? You've got someone else in their supply chain who makes mobile phone, makes the battery, someone else who creates the case. You've got the mineral that makes it shiny, which is being mined by children as young as 8 in India. A couple of years ago, they tried to make a slave-free phone and they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. Yet I'm sat here preaching about why modern slavery is bad, but I still need a mobile phone. And I sound like a hypocrite, but, you know, in some instances, there's nothing as an individual you can necessarily do, and it's down to that company. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that just speaks like the scale of modern day slavery, like from the clothes that you wear to what you use in the shower to how you connect to people, your laptop, your phone, just the service that you may use. Like, it just shows like how big of an issue this is and how deep it goes. Something like some people just turn off at it. And I think that as like we get more interconnected and we get more globalized and technology advances, it just gets worse. And I think you spoke about this earlier with Frank, the story of Frank, when you said how the plane and a phone call, that's something that didn't exist however years ago, but it just makes life so much easier. And I think from even things like Snapchat and dating apps and stuff like that, that people have just been using that easy access to technology to just go that extra mile, and just makes it way easier. Do you think that all of these things are really I guess you could say, the driving force of why this issue just keeps on multiplying and it's not really being dealt with?
Yeah, 100%. Like, and it's like I said a minute ago, like, you know, as individuals, we all have a responsibility to shop locally and do our best, but there is only so much we can do. And the driving force behind slavery is the people and the companies who exploit the people down the supply chains. 100%. That is why it's so bad. And a couple of years ago in the industry, so, you know, if you go and use a car wash, or if you go and get your nails done, and you pay, let's say it's £20 cash that goes directly to the person, not the woman who's done your nails, but the woman who's in charge of her, all of that money is not being paid into taxes. And essentially what's happening is that money that we're paying as consumers is going directly back into the hands of the employers, we call them. And all they do then is create another problem, you know. And let's say a car wash, for example, someone's maybe, you know, reported something that's happened in the car wash. If the people are so powerful, and if they get any wind of the fact that they've been caught out, they have enough money and enough resources to just move the operation and start somewhere else. And the sole problem is us as consumers not knowing what's best to do when we can do something about it. And the companies, Samsung, Apple, are huge. They're massive and they need to do more. It's as simple as that. And then you have people on the other side, like us and other charities, who need to support the survivors, because we do need to remember that actually for some survivors who are in some situations, it is their only form of money if they're getting money. We had a case a couple of years ago. It was the first case tried under the Modern Slavery Act in 2015, and two young Vietnam girls who were working in and they, we went in and we got them out of their exploitation, but because they were so young, they actually looked at their employees as, their carers and the people with them. We took away into safety because they thought they were already safe. I think it's called Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah. So were they very conflicted in the trial?
Okay, they got paid nothing a month and the other one got paid. They had essentially been molded into thinking that this man and woman protected them, and it was almost normal what they were being put through. And it's just people. It's people that are horrible. It's companies that need to do more, and it's individuals who need to look at their what's ethically sourced and what isn't.
How can people be involved, and how can they try to be more ethical with what they're sourcing, or look out for signs of this to actually help those who are victims of modern day slavery?
So it sounds silly, but it's almost about trusting your gut. So if you ever, I'll talk about the signs, but if you're ever concerned about a potential victim, if you've gone into that car wash, or if you've walked past a car wash, you can see the men with no PPE equipment on. You can potentially see some sort of living conditions at the back of the car wash. We run the Modern Slavery Helpline, and I'll send you all the info, so feel free to send that all to everyone. Or you can submit a report online. It's totally confidential. It's not like the police. Nothing will happen immediately because we need to work with local police authorities, the National Crime Agency. We need to get the evidence, and we need to take it really seriously. But, as an individual, especially with spotting signs, there are so many things you can look out for. So physical appearance, so showing signs of physical or psychological abuse, if they look malnourished or unkept, or even anxious, agitated, or appear withdrawn and neglected, and they might have untreated injuries. Isolation, so rarely being allowed to travel on their own, always seeming under control or the influence of others. For example, I mentioned, in the nail bar, if the woman who's painted your nails isn't allowed to take the money, but someone else is who's watching over them all. Same in car washes. And a lot of the time we see situations in airports or bus drivers and things like that, where bus drivers who will see the same man bringing a different woman on the bus each day. People who work in pharmacies will see the same man bringing in different women every day to get the morning after pill. Because obviously if they're in some sort of prostitution or, working in a brothel, the moment that woman gets pregnant, they're not making any money anymore. And some other signs to look out for is poor living conditions. So like I said, Frank got brought over to the UK. He was thrown in the van. His son was taken away from him. For 10 years, Frank worked in building sites, private homes, and in car washes. And there was a long point in his life where Frank actually lived in a caravan behind the car wash with 6 other men. They had no heating, no plumbing. They had to use the oven for heat. And these are all things to look out for. But also it's about trusting your gut. We can all tell if something's wrong with someone sometimes. And I think if you go and you see something wrong, if you see maybe your neighbour, we have a lot of cases where it's the neighbour who will get people out of exploitation. People who are in domestic servitude in someone's house. There was a case in Bristol 2 years ago now, and a neighbour saw a gentleman in the house next door washing himself, his clothes, his teeth, his body in this one basin of water. And, if it wasn't for the neighbour, that person would still be in exploitation. So it's about keeping your eye open, being conscious, and learning the signs to look out for, and having the modern slavery number. And of course, if it's an emergency situation, always call 999.
Thank you, Claire. I think definitely that will help others who are in those situations, and we're able to support them and get them out of them. It's Thank you. So Claire, as you work for the charity Unseen, would you like to talk a bit more what Unseen does and like what as a charity and how they support the victims of modern day slavery?
Yeah, so Unseen is, I'm probably biased, but I think it's amazing. Unseen is an incredible charity that's been around since 2008, and our sole mission is to end modern slavery. Like, I don't want to be in this job because slavery shouldn't be happening in 2021. So at Unseen, we do so many different things. We train frontline workers. We work with, local police authorities, National Crime Agency. We go into schools and we teach children. We provide their parents with information. But most importantly, we support survivors of modern slavery. We could talk about modern slavery till we're blue in the face, but we need to support the people that have actually been through it. We are never going to understand what someone's exactly been through, but if we can help them start their life again after it was taken away from them, that is what we want to do. So the first stage on a survivor's long and difficult journey, towards rebuilding their lives is through us. So we have 2 safe houses, a men's and women's safe house. We have a community program which supports people in the community. Maybe they've come out of the safe house or they have never been in the safe house, and we want them to build their confidence, help them with their recover their self-esteem, gain vital skills for future independence. So, our women's safe house, for example, is 24 hours support. And the moment that a woman steps through our door, we're going to help her with her bespoke case. We can help with medical care and treatment, counselling, legal advice, education, financial assistance, immigration advice, assistance to return home or reside in the UK. And actually, so many survivors, not just men and women, children, everybody who have come, to us have had a horrible experience, including forced labour, sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, and they often arrive unable to trust anybody. So, they've been experiencing frequent and intense flashbacks, and they live in fear. And our aim is to turn that around and give them their lives back by providing an environment that is welcoming, safe, and supportive. And, I'm really proud that I work for this charity, and we've seen, women and children who have come into our services, and the council or someone has given them a 1-bedroom flat. You can't have a 2-year-old and a mum in the same flat with one bed. The mum could have been experiencing, sexual abuse for 10 years, and she's got serious trauma from that. And she could be waking up with night terrors, not having to have the windows open. And that poor child as well is also now experiencing that. So we work with so many different services across Bristol and the wider areas, just being able to provide whoever it is that support. It's as simple as that. And, I suppose now is quite a nice time to tell you about the end of Frank's story as well. So Frank, like I said, worked for 10 years over the course of when he was in private homes, car washes. And one day Frank's back broke and he was dumped on the side of the street because, to the exploiters, he was worth nothing to them anymore. And so Frank eventually was brought into our care. He was in our safe house and he strived. He was able to make contact with his son and his daughter. Sadly, his wife passed away when he was in exploitation in the UK. And I think that's just another point to make, that actually, not only was Frank's life taken away from him, he wasn't able to be there for his wife and his daughter. And, that's another thing they took away from him. It's just horrible. So Frank came into our services. He learned English. He studied a new course to get a new job. And he started saving up money to head back to Barbados. We actually helped his son. We got a private investigator to find his son and get his son out of exploitation. Frank was in our service for just over a year, and he wrote a beautiful poem, and he really thanked us. And actually, but it's not about us. That's what we want to do. And actually, Frank now is back in Barbados with his family, and he's happy again, and he trusts again. And that's all that matters, that Frank's life is back on track. It should never, ever have been taken away from him. But what we want to do at Unseen is solely support those survivors. And, our safe houses are great, and my colleagues who work there are fantastic. And they put in so much work, 24 hours, every day of the year. And I'm lucky enough in my job, so a lot of the time, non-COVID, we take some of our supporters in the community to days out. And, to me and you, that might sound silly. We've been to a zoo. We don't need to go to the zoo. But actually, money raised from students, for example, in Plymouth, will help our survivors go for a day out. And it could be to the zoo. It could be, to do a yoga session. It could be to hire a private investigator. It totally depends on that person. And I was lucky enough last year, we ended up having some funding to buy band equipment because the men in the men's safe house wanted to start playing a band. And, I was like, yeah, fine, like if that's what they want to do. And I went along and we got some band equipment and I was sent some videos of them playing the music. And it was so beautiful because language isn't a barrier. Like language is a barrier, but music isn't. So all these men who suddenly, they might be learning English and they can't communicate very well, could suddenly communicate, it's so cheesy, through the music. But it's simple little things that me and you take for granted that really get these people, get our survivors through. And, they're not victims, they're survivors because they've survived things that are so traumatic that we couldn't even believe would ever happen. And it's amazing to see, and I'm really proud to work for them. And on top of all of that, we train businesses, we train them in how to become, how to have better supply chains. It's amazing that companies are coming to us to be like, what can I do? And we train police, we train fire brigade, we train anyone who may come into contact with a survivor so they can spot the signs and they can, call the Modern Slavery Helpline and pass it on to other people. Yeah, it's an amazing cause and, more needs to be done and we're doing it, but it's a fantastic start.
Absolutely. It's honestly incredible what you and your colleagues at Unseen do. The fact that you give these people a new chance at life, essentially, and help them get back on track. And with Frank's story, it's incredible that he's able to go back home and be reunited with his son, which was used as a part of debt bondage against him for so many years. And it's so glad that there was a resolution for that. And it's a shame that he was in that position in the first place, but the fact that he's no longer there and he's Unseen has helped him move past this and get back on track with life is absolutely incredible. What would you say would be the 5 key things for people to remember or take away from this?
There's a couple of things you can take away. One of them is learn the signs to look out for. Don't be afraid to call the Modern Slavery Helpline and report something. You can report on the Modern Slavery Unseen app. You can report online or you can call them. And at the helpline, our advisors who work there, again, 24/7, they're experts in modern slavery. And even if you are unsure or you're like, yeah, I saw something, but I'm not 100%, that is what they're there for. You can call the helpline. They will talk you through about what you saw. And it could be that you and Joe Bloggs down the street also called up again about the same car wash. And it's all about building a case. So number one, don't ever be afraid to call the Modern Slavery Helpline and just make a report and talk to someone about it. Number two, ethically source. It's hard, especially in these times of COVID. A lot of people are on furlough, on 80% pay, may have lost jobs. So it's not to make you feel guilty, but just do your research. So for example, when you're looking at, if you want to buy clothes or if you want to buy, from a food shop, you can check out the company's policy page. Don't entirely trust it because it's quite easy to do, but it's all about just having a little look, see if the brand is ethical, and usually they should have quite an extensive amount of information available to the public. A good brand will have nothing to hide. If the brand doesn't say anything about where the clothes are made, that is a massive red flag. And you know what? Send them an email. It takes time, trying to be really good. If you can't just shop locally or you're really confident in somewhere you're buying from, send them an email, because not only are you trying to be good for yourself, by you sending an email to whatever company it might be, you're helping them realize what they need to do as well. Another thing you can do is look for brand certifications. So for example, fair trade and things like that. Email the brand directly. Again, it doesn't matter who they are, just email them. You ask them where their clothes are made, what steps the brand has done to ensure the safety and fair pay of all the workers. The other thing that you can do is it's a website called Slavery Footprint, made in free world. And if you go onto the Slavery Footprint website, it will just ask you questions about your lifestyle. You just fill them in and it tell you on average how many slaves that you have working for you and things that you can do to stop that. Be conscious, look around, trust your gut, look after people, learn the signs, go on Unseen's website, look at the resources, have a read of things, get yourself clued up about what is modern slavery, spread awareness. Please do that. If there's one takeaway that you do, spread awareness. The more people that know about this, the better. Slavery now is worse than it ever was. There's more slaves now than there were in the transatlantic slave trade. It's the fastest growing crime. It's second to the drugs trade, yet you never hear about this on BBC documentaries, on the news. More needs to be done. It's like £14 billion industry. So yeah, my takeaways are learn the signs. Don't be afraid to call non-slavery helpline. Look at where you're buying your products from. Just try and be good with it. And if you can't do that for whatever reason, that's fine. But spread awareness and just tell people and just do something.
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking with us today, Claire. I hope the listeners really enjoyed your interview and sharing the awareness of what unseen and modern day slavery is. Thank you so much.
No worries, guys.